Thomas Wilson's job application showed nothing unusual. 68 years old, former custodian, quiet man. The perfect candidate for a janitor position at Arlington National Cemetery. No military background, no war medals. Just someone looking for work. For 30 years, no one asked who he was. No one knew he returned to the cemetery every night, stood before each headstone and whispered, "You will never be forgotten." Until one Memorial Day evening, when the president himself caught him. Welcome to Unseen Valor. Before we continue, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe stories like these need to be heard, subscribe to help keep these voices alive. Arlington National Cemetery stretches across 639 acres of gentle hills, where the fallen rest in perfect symmetry. White marble headstones, 400,000 of them, stand in solemn rows that seem to stretch into eternity. It's a place of reverence, of history, of sacrifice. America's most sacred ground. In a small maintenance building at the cemetery's edge, Thomas Wilson began each day the same way. He arrived at 4:30 a.m. before the sun broke over the Washington Monument in the distance. He'd hang his worn brown jacket on the same hook, pour coffee into the same chipped mug, and check the daily assignment sheet without a word to anyone. The other maintenance workers called him Old Tom. They didn't know much about him, just that he was reliable, thorough, and kept to himself. He never joined them for lunch, never shared weekend plans, never complained about the weather or politics or sore knees. He simply did his job, moving through the grounds like a shadow, collecting fallen leaves, emptying trash bins, and polishing the occasional memorial plaque. Visitors never noticed him. Tour groups walked past without a glance. Military honor guards performing their solemn duties barely acknowledged his presence. Thomas was fine with that. He wasn't there to be seen. "Morning, Wilson," said Frank Garza, the day shift supervisor, sliding the assignment clipboard across the break room table. "Section 60 needs attention today. Some tree branches came down in the storm last night." Thomas nodded, taking the clipboard without looking up. Section 60, where many of the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan were laid to rest. The newest graves, the freshest grief. "Should be a busy one," Garza continued. "Memorial Day weekend coming up. The place will be packed." Thomas nodded again, finished his coffee, and headed out. Words were precious to him, not to be wasted on small talk. As he pushed his maintenance cart through the winding paths, the morning mist still clung to the ground, wrapping around the bases of the headstones like reverent hands. Thomas worked methodically, clearing debris, straightening floral tributes that had blown askew, wiping morning dew from memorial benches. At one grave, a small American flag had fallen. Thomas stopped, carefully picked it up, and gently pushed it back into the soft earth. His hand lingered on the cold marble headstone. PFC, Michael Sanderson, 2010, Afghanistan. "It's going to be a beautiful day, Michael," he whispered, so softly it might have been just the wind. Then he moved on. No one saw this moment of tenderness. No one saw the hundreds of similar moments that filled Thomas Wilson's days for the past 3 decades. No one asked why a man with no military background would choose to spend his final working years among the dead. The questions that weren't asked had answers that would have changed everything. James Parker was the new cemetery director, appointed just 3 months earlier. At 42, he was younger than most in his position, ambitious, efficient, and determined to modernize operations at Arlington. He'd already implemented new visitor management systems, updated security protocols, and was pushing for a digital catalog of every grave. Parker prided himself on knowing his staff, but Thomas Wilson remained an enigma. Their interactions had been minimal. A nod in the hallway, a brief exchange about equipment needs, nothing more. But something about the old janitor nagged at him. "How long has Wilson been here?" Parker asked Garza one afternoon, watching through his office window as Thomas meticulously cleared leaves from a memorial statue. "Wilson? Forever," Garza chuckled. "Was here when I started 15 years ago. Pretty sure he came with the property." "What's his story?" "Don't know much. Keeps to himself. Never misses a day, though. Best worker we've got." Parker nodded, making a mental note to review Wilson's personnel file. It wasn't urgent, just administrative curiosity. That curiosity turned to concern. A week later, when the security update Parker had ordered flagged something unusual. The new system tracked all after-hours access to the cemetery grounds, and according to the logs, Thomas Wilson's ID badge was being used almost every night, typically from 9 p.m. until around 3 a.m. Could be a system error, the security consultant suggested. Or he forgot to clock out, offered Parker's assistant. But Parker wasn't convinced. "Pull the camera footage," he ordered. The footage showed Thomas Wilson returning to the cemetery after hours, alone, carrying nothing but a small backpack. Night after night, the same routine. He would enter through the maintenance gate, disappear among the headstones, and re-emerge hours later, looking exhausted but somehow at peace. "What the hell is he doing out there?" Parker muttered. The logical assumption was troubling. Theft, vandalism, something inappropriate. Arlington had strict rules about after-hours access, especially for non-security personnel. Whatever Wilson was doing, it needed to stop. "I'll handle this myself," Parker decided. That night, he waited in his car near the maintenance entrance. At precisely 9:15 p.m., Thomas Wilson appeared, walking slowly but purposefully. He used his badge at the gate and entered the grounds. Parker waited a few minutes, then followed. The cemetery at night was a different world. Silent, solemn, almost ethereal in the moonlight. He followed Thomas from a distance, staying in the shadows of trees and monuments. Thomas walked directly to Section 60, where the most recent casualties were buried. Parker expected him to do something suspicious. Dig around the graves, perhaps, or tamper with memorial items. Instead, Thomas did something completely unexpected. He began to speak. Standing before the first headstone in the row, Thomas removed his cap and said clearly, "Captain James Rodriguez, died 2011, Afghanistan. Thank you for your service. You are not forgotten." Then he moved to the next grave. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, died 2013, Afghanistan. Thank you for your service. You are not forgotten." And the next. Private First Class Deshaun Williams, died 2008, Iraq. Thank you for your service. You are not forgotten. Parker stood frozen, watching in disbelief. Thomas continued down the row, speaking to each grave, addressing each fallen soldier by name, rank, year, and place of death. He didn't read from anything. He knew them all from memory. After an hour of this, Thomas moved to another section. Parker followed, increasingly mystified. The pattern continued. Thomas visiting graves, speaking to the dead, acknowledging each one individually. Not rushing, not performing, just connecting. By midnight, Parker was no longer suspicious, but deeply moved. What had begun as an investigation into potential misconduct had become witness to something profound. Still, questions remained. Why was Thomas doing this? How did he know every name? And why had he kept this ritual secret for what must have been years? Parker decided to confront him, not as a director disciplining an employee, but as one human being seeking to understand another. He waited until Thomas had finished a section before stepping out from behind a large memorial. "Mr. Wilson," he said quietly. Thomas turned, unsurprised, as if he'd known he was being followed all along. "Director Parker," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I think we need to talk about what you're doing here." Thomas looked at him steadily, no fear or shame in his eyes. "I'm making sure they're remembered." "Every night?" "As many as I can get to. There are over 400,000. I try to reach them all at least once a year." Parker was stunned. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I started working here. 30 years now." "But why? These aren't your family members. You weren't in the military." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the endless rows of white stones, silver in the moonlight. "My brother was," he finally said. "Robert Wilson. Vietnam, 1969. Understanding began to dawn on Parker. "Is he buried here?" Thomas shook his head. He's not buried anywhere. Missing in action. Body never recovered." His voice remained steady, but his eyes held decades of pain. "When a soldier goes missing, Director Parker, it's not just a body that disappears. It's their story, their sacrifice. They become ghosts." He gestured to the graves around them. "These men and women, at least they have stones with their names. Someone visits sometimes. But so many are forgotten. The World War boys whose families have all died off. The Korea vets whose grandchildren never knew them. The Vietnam guys whose country turned its back when they came home." He paused. "Or didn't come home." "So you remember for them," Parker said softly. "Someone has to say their names." Thomas looked directly at Parker now. "I couldn't find my brother, couldn't bring him home, but I can make sure others aren't forgotten." Parker struggled to find words. The dedication, the quiet devotion, it was overwhelming. "Mr. Wilson, what you're doing is remarkable. But there are procedures, security protocols. I can't have unauthorized personnel wandering the grounds at night." Thomas nodded, resigned. "I understand. I'll clear out my locker tomorrow." "That's not what I meant," Parker said quickly. "I'm not firing you. I need to figure this out. This is unprecedented." They stood in silence, the weight of 400,000 souls seeming to press around them. Finally, Parker spoke again. "Would you show me? Your process, I mean. How you do this every night?" Thomas considered for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me." For the next 2 hours, Parker walked with Thomas through the cemetery, listening as the old janitor spoke to the dead. Thomas knew not just names and dates, but stories. Who had been a high school quarterback, who had left behind twins, who had dreamed of becoming a teacher after their service. "How do you know all this?" Parker asked, amazed. "I listen," Thomas said simply. "When families visit, they talk. They tell stories. I remember them. And for the older graves, I research. Library books, old newspapers, online databases now. Everyone deserves to have their story remembered." As dawn approached, they found themselves at the tomb of the unknown soldier, its white marble glowing in the pre-morning light. The changing of the guard would happen soon, the first visitors would arrive, and Thomas Wilson would transform back into the invisible janitor no one noticed. "I need to get back," Thomas said, checking his watch. "My shift starts in an hour." Parker nodded, still processing everything he had witnessed. "Mr. Wilson, I thank you for showing me this, for what you do." Thomas shrugged. "Just doing what needs doing." As they walked back toward the maintenance building, Parker made a decision. "I'm going to issue you an official after-hours access pass. No more sneaking around. And I want to record your stories, all the things you know about these soldiers. It should be preserved." Thomas looked skeptical. "I don't do this for recognition." "I know. You do it for them. But think about it. What happens when you're gone? Who remembers them then?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Thomas had never considered his own mortality in relation to his mission. Who would speak to the dead when he was dead himself? The following week, a small recorder appeared in Thomas's locker with a note from Parker. "Just speak their stories for the archives." Thomas stared at it for a long time before slipping it into his pocket. That night, as he made his rounds, he began to record. Hesitant at first, then with growing confidence, he shared the stories he had collected over 3 decades. Tales of heroism, of ordinary lives cut short, of dreams deferred and promises unkept. Word of Thomas's nightly vigil spread quietly through the Arlington staff. No one made a fuss. That would have embarrassed him. But small things changed. Security guards nodded respectfully when he arrived for his night visits. The grounds crew left fresh flowers by certain graves they knew he would visit. Young staffers occasionally asked him about specific sections, specific soldiers. As Memorial Day approached, Arlington prepared for its busiest weekend. Thousands would visit, including dignitaries, veterans, and families of the fallen. Among them would be the president, coming to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Thomas worked tirelessly, ensuring every corner of the cemetery was immaculate. This year felt different, not because his routine had changed, but because for the first time in 30 years, he wasn't invisible anymore. The evening before Memorial Day, Thomas began his rounds earlier than usual. He wanted to visit a particular section before the crowds made it impossible. As dusk fell, he knelt beside a grave in a far corner of the cemetery, one of the oldest sections where Spanish-American war veterans lay. Corporal Henry Jenkins, 1898, Cuba, he said softly. "Your great-granddaughter isn't well enough to visit this year, but she sent these." He placed a small bunch of forget-me-nots by the weathered stone. "And I'm here. You are not forgotten." He was so focused that he didn't notice the small group approaching until they were just yards away. The Secret Service agents came first, then a tall figure flanked by military aides. Thomas stood quickly, surprised and uncertain. The President of the United States was not scheduled to visit until tomorrow. Yet here he was, walking through the cemetery at dusk, headed straight toward Thomas. "Mr. Wilson," the President said, extending his hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Thomas hesitated, then shook the offered hand. "Mr. President, Director Parker told me about your nightly visits. 30 years of remembering the fallen, one name at a time." The President looked at the grave Thomas had just attended. "That's quite a commitment." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Just doing what needs doing, sir." The most significant change came 6 months later, when Arlington National Cemetery officially established the Remembrance Project. Based on Thomas's work, it created a digital archive of personal stories for every grave in the cemetery. Thomas was asked to lead the effort, training volunteers in his methods of research and remembrance. "I'm just a janitor," he protested when Parker presented the proposal. "You're the keeper of their memories," Parker replied. "And now you can make sure that work continues even after you're gone." On the anniversary of his brother's disappearance, Thomas visited a special memorial at Arlington, a section dedicated to those missing in action. He placed his Presidential Citizen's Medal at the base of the memorial. "This belongs to you, Robert," he whispered. "And to all of them, I just did the remembering." As he stood to leave, he noticed something unusual. A group of Arlington staff and volunteers had gathered quietly nearby. Without fanfare or ceremony, they each placed a hand over their heart in silent salute. Thomas Wilson had spent 30 years making sure others were remembered. Now, at last, he had been seen. What began as one man's private mission became something larger, a reminder that the greatest valor is sometimes found not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, consistent act of remembrance. That honoring sacrifice isn't just about grand ceremonies, but about speaking names into the darkness, ensuring that those who gave everything are never truly gone. Now I ask you, who in your life deserves to be remembered? Who carries out their mission of honor without recognition or praise? Share their story in the comments. And remember, true valor isn't always seen. Sometimes it walks silently among the headstones, whispering names only the night can hear. This is Unseen Valor. Subscribe to ensure these stories continue to be told.